makes you think about things. You know, it's when they mention cyclone now, you know, even all the years since Tracy, so as soon as they say the cyclone round, when you know, you start wondering a bit and worrying, and you know, if they get too close, the hair stands up on the back of your neck. No, it wasn't a very good thing, I know that. And one of my kids, my eldest girl, when they brought them back from Perth, it was 6 or 8 months after after Tracy. You know, she was, well, I can't say what was wrong with her. She just wasn't normal. She's screaming, and I took her up to the hospital a couple of times, and they couldn't find out what was wrong with her. And they said, well, she heard Tracy told me, and I said, yeah, and they put her down to like a trauma or, you know, flashbacks, because she's old enough to understand what was going on, you know.
I had to take my grandfather because they took the really critically injured people first, then they took women and children, and I ended up going with my grandfather. We were on one of the last planes out. I didn't want to go because I wanted to stay with my dad. He worked down the wharf, and because he couldn't leave because they were, you know, pulling bodies out of Darwin Harbour, and he was on call like 24/7. And I suppose I was worried about him, but I had to take my grandfather away. They were worrying about people getting diseases, and they didn't want women in Darwin and children, you know, girls, because all the army had moved in. We ended up going to. There was no communication, so we didn't know where to go because all our family was here. So my dad said, just hop on a plane and just try and... My mother had moved to Adelaide a few months earlier. Just try and find your mother. So we ended up going to a Nogra Army camp in Brisbane. We stayed there for a few days. We ended up hopping on another plane, going to Adelaide, and we turned up there. My mother had been sleeping at the airport for a couple of weeks, waiting to see if it would turn up. Yeah, so then we ended up staying at the Enfield nursing quarters with other Darwin families that came down from the cyclone. Stayed there for a while, came back, and then I wanted to come back to Darwin, so I did. Must have stayed there a couple of months. Came back to school, and there was, even though the school was open, there was no schoolwork. We just played games, sports, because we had no power at home. The school had no power. We just used to rock up and catch up with all our friends, and that was 1975, really. So I didn't really have much of an education, but then the following year we had, you know, by that time power had been restored, and we were living in a little caravan, and yeah, so we lived in a caravan for about 6 years, yeah.
We were the first lot out. We went Boxing Day, and they let me go down and see Chrissy, and then they loaded him first into the big plane, and we were in little cot sort of things along the side, and they stacked us 5 high, and there was this young fella, young nursing person, he was there. And he was stood with Chris from Darwin to Sydney in that big plane, and never let him go. He hung onto his hand all the way. We arrived in Sydney. There was an ambulance there to take us to Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. My son was put into an adult area where there was only men in there, and because they didn't have any place for children in the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, and because people were coming in from Darwin, there was a room made, a big room, about 50 or 60 people or more. I can't remember, so many people that were in there from Darwin. There was a Darwin area, and one lady died in there when I was there. my Chris went to have his operation that afternoon, and they took me to sit outside, and this man was crying then. I said to him, "What's wrong, mate?" And he said, "My wife just died." And I said, "Oh, God." So I comforted him, and I was worried about my son dying because he was in a bad way. They nearly lost him, but the doctors were so good. About 5 or 6 weeks he was in Royal Prince Alfred, and then went out to Margaret Reed's Orthopaedic Hospital recovery, and he was there for about 4 months. And my husband and I went down and picked him up and brought him home, and he never ever let that be a drawback for him. He's 54, no, 52. No, 52, yeah. He's a mentor for Aboriginal children who are coming in from communities. They want to join the army, and so he's their mentor, and he's a bloody good kid. He's a grandfather. Life has not been a bunch of roses, but you only make it how you want it to be. And I feel I've got the best end of the stick, and I couldn't ask for anything better. My heart's here. I can't go and live somewhere else. I can only live in Darwin.